Hello, and welcome to Manhattan Is Lenape, a panel produced in collaboration with the Lenape Center. Tonight is the first night of New York Public Radio's and the Green Space's First People's Week. My name is Jocelyn Getgen Kestenbaum, and I am Associate Professor of Clinical Law at Cardozo Law School, where I direct the Benjamin B. Ferencz Human Rights and Atrocity Prevention Clinic and the Cardozo Law Institute in Holocaust and Human Rights, or CLEAR. CLEAR is a global center for the study and practice at the intersection of law and atrocity prevention. We look to lessons of the past, including the Holocaust and other genocides, to respond to ongoing discrimination and violence we see in the process of genocide and other mass atrocities of today. In addition, we protect individuals fleeing such violence, as well as push for accountability, justice, and rebuilding in the wake of atrocity crimes. I came to know Lenape Center when I asked Adrian Kumans to open the seminar I teach in Indigenous rights, recognizing the need to connect people to place at Cardozo Law School, especially if we were going to be talking about human rights and Indigenous populations. What I received from Lenape Center was so much more in terms of relationship, reciprocity, and true partnership toward resisting genocide and transformative justice for the original peoples of Manhattan. We encourage all of you tuning in to participate. If you have any questions for our panelists or any questions at all, please share them in the comments, and we'll try to get to them throughout the show. Tonight, I'm joined by Joe Baker and Adrian Kumans. Joe Baker is an artist, curator, educator. He's executive director of the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center in Connecticut, and he's co-founder and executive director of the Lenape Center. He's an enrolled member of the Delaware Tribe of Indians in Bartow, Oklahoma. Adrian Kumans is co-founder and co-director of Lenape Center and advisor for well-being. His work focuses on cultural continuance and genocide prevention. Adrian lectures at Columbia University, and he's an adopted member of the White Turkey Fugate family. Joe, Adrian, welcome to First People's Week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wanishi.
Adrian, I've welcomed you to First People's Week, but if you could, please welcome our viewers to Lenapehoking.
Wanishi, Jocelyn. On behalf of Lenape Center, I want to welcome everyone who is within the homeland of Lenapehoking with the following words. Nulolinda muhana elipaeku Lenapehoking. Kulao sihimo and achpiiku. We are glad because all of you came here to Lenapehoking. Live well while you are here. This is a welcome that we give when we are acknowledging not only land, but welcoming all those who continue to come.
Wanishi. Joe, tell us, who are the Lenape and what is Lenape Center?
Lenape Center was established in 2008. Adrian and I were standing on a street in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and I had this very strong feeling that we needed to do something to reestablish our presence within the great city of New York. We had all but vanished from the public consciousness. And even at that time, the other reality that we were facing was that there are others who stood in our place and spoke for our people, the Lenape. So while that was a concern in 2008, it remains a concern today. So we are here as a nonprofit organization to continue Lenapehoking through programs of art and culture, through incredible partnerships throughout the city and beyond, throughout Lenapehoking.
Joe and Adrian, tell us about the importance of land acknowledgement, and specifically the idea of living land acknowledgement of the Lenape as part of the work that Lenape Center does.
We realized through the years of doing our work that in many ways we were already doing the work of the movement of contemporary land acknowledgement that has come from essentially the area of Australia and New Zealand through Canada, then eventually here to Lenapehoking. And in seeing the trajectory of land acknowledgement as a movement, we realized that in order to inform a process that had more equity, more relationship, and more responsibility built in, that we would create a process that we call living land acknowledgement, which is about sustainability, relationship, and a long-term commitment. And that's a way of preventing the situation where someone would simply put a statement on the wall, acknowledge, and yet not have any follow-up action towards equity and justice.
Joe, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, the notion of continuance speaks clearly of our history and our survivance. I do want to mention that we are directed, much of our work is directed today by those who have come before us, and specifically the work of Nora Thompson Dean, who we take our directions from today. She, as a tribal elder, did in the 1970s began these return trips to the ancestral land, and she spoke clearly and poignantly that she could feel and hear the ancestors here. So we continue her work through what we term a living land acknowledgement.
And it's such great and important work. Wanishi, thank you. Adrian, we'll hear from you in a little bit later in the show. Next, we're going to be talking with Joe, continuing with Joe, and with Curtis Zunigha. He's a co-director of Lenape Center. And Curtis of the Delaware Tribe lives in Oklahoma at his respective Lenape Nation. Welcome, Curtis.
Wanishi, I know everyone's been using that word a lot, but for all of the other people that are watching this, it is in the language of the Lenape people, Wanishi meaning thank you, of course. So I appreciate the opportunity and the privilege of being on this call with my colleagues.
And we are hearing from you from Oklahoma. How does the main body of the Lenape, the people of Manhattan, end up in Oklahoma?
Well, it probably starts with the land acknowledgement statement that seems to be trending, where people back in the homeland, and I'll use New York City as an example, that want to acknowledge the homeland. But as Joe Baker said, our presence isn't like it was because we were run out of Lenapehoking. Over a period of time, we were partners in providing land occupancy for the Dutch, the British, and even the American colonies all throughout our homeland. And then when we got moved out after they firmly gained control of the lands, we were split up into various bands around the country. Our band, the largest one in the treaty history, our band traveled across Ohio, Indiana, into Missouri, all during the 17th century. Then around 1830, we had a reservation in Kansas for about 35 years, and then we were moved down into the Indian Territory in the year 1867. and occupied territory where we remain to this day within the boundaries of the old Cherokee Nation Indian territory. So the Delaware Tribe of Indians has been principally headquartered in this area that's now the city of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Or as I like to tell people that live around here, we were here before Bartles. So we have 150, over 150-year history now being here in Oklahoma. But there is also a band of Lenape in Western Oklahoma. There are 2 bands in Southern Ontario, Canada. They've been there since the 1790s. And then there's a band of Muncies who affiliated with the Stockbridge Mohican people. And they have a small reservation in Wisconsin. So we're kind of splittered up and sent in different directions. And it's all a matter of a diaspora of survival and perseverance and endurance. And because of that, because of the sacrifices of my ancestors and the great work that Joe Baker mentioned about people like Nora Thompson Dean, it gives me the privilege to sit in on this call and represent the Lenape.
You are talking about survivance, and we've heard a little of the Lenape language, including the word for thank you, but also the welcome. Can you speak to the importance of language as part of cultural survival of peoples?
Well, yes, language is the foundation of all things culture. We have had a word for everything in our language. And even when we encountered new things, we found ways of deriving words that would give us an understanding of new things that we encountered. I mean, we got words today that are computer and television and those kinds of things. That's an act of survivance and endurance and adaptation for survival is keeping our language alive. And why do we do that? Because again, language is the cultural foundation of everything. Language is a way that we were able to communicate and keep our people together. Language was something that the colonizer many times tried to take away from us because they realized that language was the foundation of our culture. And our culture is what gave us an identity that by ancestral obligation, we had to hold on to fiercely and proudly and pass on to the next generation. So it is that kind of cultural and spiritual and ancestral obligation that even makes our language a sacred thing. We still struggle to maintain our language, but it is a sacred endeavor, and we rely heavily on a lot of scholars and people that can help bring the language together and preserve it. And we have a person like that that's been living amongst the Lenape, and it is a, for all practical purposes, an adopted tribal member that spent over 60 years among the Lenape, recording, writing, learning, and creating a huge treasure trove, nationally, internationally renowned treasure trove, which is now part of the Delaware Tribe's language website, talk-lenape.org. It's an amazing resource, and we're trying to use it to teach our young people also. We brought it to a couple of youth camps in succeeding years, and we've got young people starting to use some words. It's empowering, and when you speak the language of the ancestors, it helps you stay connected to them. And that is what our culture is about, the linking of generation after generation.
Curtis, you have so much historical knowledge, and we'll be speaking in this next segment with Todd Poisson of BKSK Architects on the renovation of Tammany Hall. Can you take a moment to speak about who Tammany was?
Tammany or Tamanin was in the language, Sakima, a chief, not the chief, but the one that is most renowned in the late 17th century. The year, I believe, was 1683, when Tamanin led a delegation of Lenape people down the downriver people, the Unami or Turtle Clan people, centered around the Philadelphia, southern New Jersey area. Tamanin led a delegation of Lenape in the homeland and eventually negotiated an agreement with a British or English colonial governor, William Penn, who, with negotiation led by Tamanin, provided land for the Pennsylvania colony to take root and flourish. Again, it was an agreement. It had to do with shared occupancy, not the sale of land. Penn, in his Quaker upbringing, saw Tamanin as a person who is represented goodwill and strength and respect and elderly wisdom. And that's why Tamanin was written prominently in the history of the founding of Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania colony. There is a very large statue in Philadelphia of Tamanin that is located around Front and Market Streets in Philadelphia. And a very imposing statue of Tamanin representing the native population that is in the Philadelphia area. So he will be remembered as being a great leader, but also with words of caution, realize that in time, even the promises made by William Penn were not followed, and the Lenape were cheated out of land and eventually run off. But you also have to remember, William Penn showed up from England with a piece of paper in his hand, calling it a charter for land that the king gave him. And as Lenape people were hearing stories that some king in another country gave someone our land. That's our first encounter. So language was important in conversing and conveying these thoughts as Tamanin was seeking to have a peaceful negotiation, but language also loses some of its meaning when it is misinterpreted or concepts that are unfamiliar with the Lenape are part of the dialogue. And I think that worked out to the disfavor of the Lenape people. However, Tamanin, written as the affable one, will always remain a proud and prominent figure in the history of the Lenape people, particularly in the Philadelphia area. But his name was adopted by the colonizers as someone who represented the freedom of the new land, the newly developing American colonies. And at one point, he was adopted, his visage, his historic presence was adopted to the point where they would have Tammany festivals, or the Festival of St. Tammany. There's even a St. Tammany Parish in New Orleans, and Louisiana rather. But American colonies started having Tammany Day, and at one point he was written about as the patron saint of the American colonies. That's how huge of a figure that he was. I'm trying to lead you to what you want to get to next, which is talking about Tammany Hall 2020, but certainly the St. Tammany societies that grew and developed up and down the corridor between New York and Philadelphia. The Tammany societies celebrated Tamanin as an iconic Native American figure representing the new freedoms of the American colonies. One of those societies met in New York City and became the rather infamous Tammany Hall, which in the 1850s was pretty much full of political corruption and graft. But I'll leave it there because there's more story to tell.
It is. It's such an interesting story to tell. And I want to bring the history up to the present, and maybe Joe can help us with that. If you could talk a little, Joe, about how Lenape Center is fighting erasure, the disinformation, the misinformation, the distortion, and then the complete erasure of Lenape peoples. You're on mute.
Okay. Well, we are fighting erasure through maintaining our presence, our activities, our presence here in the city of New York. And one way that we are able to do that is through partnerships. And one of the partnerships, one of the great ventures that we've experienced has been with the architect that you're about to hear from, Todd Poisson, of the architectural firm that actually did the refurbishing of Tammany Hall. But what's so amazing about that was the consultation that occurred, the ongoing dialogue about the history of Tammany Hall, the important Lenape history, and how that could be expressed in a very contemporary, vibrant form through architecture. And that's something you're about to see right now.
So let's speak with Todd. Todd Poisson is an architect and designer with BKSK Architects. He's been the lead architect on the redesign of Tammany Hall. Welcome, Todd.
Hi, honored to be here.
Tell us, how did the reconstruction and new design of Tammany Hall come about almost exactly 8 years ago today?
Yes, it was. It's kind of incredible that it was 8 years ago, almost to the day, because I remember the owner, Reading International, called us at BKSK to join a limited design competition right before Superstorm Sandy. And that's what I remember. That's how I can mark the time. We had to leave the office during the design competition and work from home. And here we are 8 years later working from home again. So it's quite a circle here. The limited design competition was to rebrand Tammany Hall. And the design brief implied that they wanted to turn their back on the name Tammany in a way. And so we dove into the history. And when I discovered the story that Curtis just described of Chief Tammany, I was blown away. I had not known that. I grew up in the Northeast, and Tammany Hall to me was synonymous with, like he said, greed, corruption, graft, boss tweed, etc. So when I learned that the namesake of Tammany Hall was this legendary, incredible person, I felt, let's not only keep the name Tammany to this project, but rebrand it, refocus the name, refocus the building on him, in fact, his history, the Lenape history, be inspired by his iconography to develop a vertical extension of the building. The brief was to rebrand the building, to enlarge it, to give it a rooftop addition, a vertical extension for a individual landmark. An individual landmark in New York City is very difficult to add a rooftop addition to, especially when it's visible. Only a few are approved every year by the Preservation Commission of New York City. So it was with great delight when I dove into that story and read the creation story of a giant turtle rising from the sea, creating land. So I thought, why not be inspired? And here we are. Now on the screen is the before shot. You could see it was a bit in construction at the time, but now here at the after, we've added a 30,000 square foot, 3-story glass and steel dome on top of the building. It's actually a new building inside behind those walls, the historic street walls. We decoupled them from the structure within, restored them, and then poured a new concrete building behind, which supports a 3-story glass and steel dome. It's actually New York City's first freeform shell grid, which is seen in Europe and Asia often, but we were inspired to use that form because it was the perfect device to express the organic nature of a turtle rising from the sea. I don't know if you could go back a couple of slides to see that turtle form rising from the building. And what we really loved about this system, this structural system, even though it was never used before in New York, we thought what a perfect expression to rebrand this building in Chief Tammany's name, using his symbol, the turtle. The statue that Curtis talked about in Philadelphia is quite grand. It must be 20 feet tall. And he's standing, he's pictured, on the statue, he's standing on a turtle. The turtle is part of the creation story of Lenape, rising from the sea, creating land. We thought, why not use that to inspire the dome that this Neo-Georgian building really should have had if Tammany Hall was being honest about its ambitions back 100 years ago. This is not their original building, but it is their last building that they occupied on Union Square, on the northeast corner of Union Square in Manhattan, from about 1928 until they sold the building in about 1945. But as Curtis said, there were dozens of Tammany societies dotting the East Coast of the United States after the Revolution. And we found documents that really even showed them as far east as Ohio. And it was so ironic that the only Tammany society to survive into the 20th century was ours in New York City, only to be known for greed, corruption, and graft. So we thought this poor recording of his history should be reversed and rebranded in a positive light.
It's truly remarkable, both looking at the building and seeing the renovation. It's beautiful, but the remarkable part is also the process and the inclusivity of Lenape and Lenape Center in the redesign. And on Friday morning, Joe and Adrian will be blessing the new Tammany Hall. You'll be able to see the blessing and the space at 4 p.m. Eastern Time at thegreenspace.org. Thank you so much, Todd.
Thank you. Thank you.
We are thrilled to be able to bring these shows to our audiences through the pandemic. Here's the thing about this: it costs money. The Green Space and New York Public Radio are a nonprofit organization that relies on support from our viewers and listeners to keep this content coming to you. So if you are in a position to make a donation, we'll be very appreciative. It's going to be very easy. We've made it easy for you. Just get onto the texting app on your phone and text the word LIVE, L-I-V-E, to 70101. That's LIVE, L-I-V-E, to 70101. We'll text you right back with a form where you can make a contribution. On behalf of us all at Green Space, thank you so much for your support of this important work. Let's bring back Joe and Adrian for our final segment to discuss some of the future plans for Lenape Center. Joe, Adrian, welcome back.
Wanishi.
Let's speak now about the real-time work, the movement that is happening on the island of Manhattan, Lenapehoking, and living land acknowledgement. Either one of you.
Well, I'll just begin by saying that there's an evolution that's happening, and to be brought in as for consultation at the beginning of the Tammany Hall renovation about 8 years ago, to now being able to see it surface. And through this relationship of working with BKSK architects, having drawings for our Lenape Center building, which has been really something that we have wanted to work towards, not as a final goal, but as as just a natural direction that this work would take us to. And the reason I say that is through the years and through the programs that we've held, it's been very much about calling the diaspora home and finding opportunities for gatherings, for symposia, for conferences, for a continuance to happen through community and through this collective voice. And we've been able to do that through partnerships, including NYU, Abrams Art Center, partners who have been able to provide us with the space and the means of holding these gatherings. And now we really hope that we can bring this to the next phase. And that's the physical building of Lenape Center. Conceptually, it was designed around Inwood Hill Park, which remains an incredibly significant cultural destination. It holds ancient trees and ancient caves, has been talked about through generations, and is some of the last part of Manhattan, which still has original woodlands.
So now that we have these conceptual drawings, thanks to BKSK Architecture, the architectural firm, we are seeking the support to realize this facility. One of the things we frequently hear from individuals throughout the city, throughout the state, throughout all of Lenapehoking is where are you located? Where is Lenape Center? And we have no, at this time, physical space. We exist and express ourselves as Indian people have been required to do throughout this complex history in the margins, in places, unexpected places, and unexpected times. Sort of that's how we roll. But looking ahead, we really feel that it's time now to have this significant place together to provide for our communities, for the diaspora, as Adrian says, to bring the people home. We have great support for moving in this direction. And now we're just looking for that individual or that entity who can help us get there.
Well, I'm hoping that you will get there and get there sooner rather than later, because I do know something about all of the artistic pursuits that you've been doing in the meantime. And I think it would be great if you could talk a little bit about the creative work of Lenape Center and partners, even without the actual physical space to call people home.
Well, one of the great and early expressions of our endeavors was a commissioned opera by the composer Brent Michael Davids, who is also co-director of Lenape Center. And that opera was performed in the sanctuary of the Collegiate Church, which is the descendant church of the Dutch West India Company. So that's how we started. That was our introduction into the cultural life of this city, the civic community of New York. And we've continued to express our work through symposia. We have an incredible project underway now, just coming to fruition, which is a seed rematriation project with Seed Shed. We're in early discussions with the New York Botanical Gardens about a long-term commitment in terms of a living land acknowledgement, utilizing the old forest growth that's a part of that amazing community resource within the city. There are many, many other things that we've been able to accomplish. Working with the Brooklyn Museum of Art has been amazing in terms of another living land acknowledgement, in that they helped us bring representatives from all the different Lenape communities from the diaspora to New York for a gathering, historic gathering, really, and you know, to bring us together.
You spoke briefly about bringing back staple crops, but I really want to talk about that project for a moment and talk about it in terms of food security. Adrian, Joe, can you describe a little bit more about that project and what it means for Lenape and for Lenape Center?
Well, to give you an idea of the importance of this project, the seeds, the corn that we have planted here in New York was made possible by a gift of Nora Thompson Dean to a seed bank. We had access to very few seeds. The first grow season, 250 plants. But from that, we will quadruple the seed count. And you know, with each successive planting, we increase that bounty of seeds. Those seeds will bring nutrition, will bring culture, will bring the DNA of our ancestors back to communities in the diaspora. You have to, the seeds survive throughout this forced removal from New York all the way to Oklahoma and now back again. That's really incredible.
You're also wearing a beautiful bag, and I think the viewers would benefit from hearing more about also your revival of some of the cultural practices and bringing those practices back to Lenapehoking.
One of the things I'm very proud about our particular tribal community is that there has been a conscientious desire to maintain the traditions of dress for the Lenape. This is a bandolier bag. Adrian is also wearing one. These are traditional bags worn by men, fully beaded, bilateral symmetry. They're big projects. I'm the beater. I sit there for hours beating. But the reason this is important, growing up in Oklahoma, I had never seen an actual bandolier bag. And it was not until much later as an adult that I first saw a bandolier bag in the collection of National Museum of the American Indian. And I was really moved to discover that those bags in that collection had been collected in Oklahoma, in the Copan, Oklahoma area. They had come from my community, and now they're in a collection. So I wanted to free that life and bring the bags back to Oklahoma. And this bag that I'm wearing is the first one I beaded, which was in 1990. And as a result, now there are 3 or 4 other beaters who are doing bandolier bags. So sometimes, you know, with it's just a small action that can create great waves of beauty.
It is really beautiful. And this is maybe to you a small act, but it has a lot of reverberating waves that will last for generations. There are other projects that you, as Lenape Center, have been involved with. I'm thinking one about the Constellation installation and also the installation, the new installation at LaGuardia.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that maybe you could talk about this as well. These are a little bit bigger splashes, maybe, to bring more attention to the Lenape.
Constellation is a project that is the vision of Melissa McGill, began in 2015, I believe. Time flies, but it was 17 poles on Bannerman's Island in the middle of the Mohikani-Tuk, the Hudson River, which created a constellation of lights at sunset. And the constellation itself referenced some of the castle, the original castle, Bannerman's Island, but also referencing Opi Tamakan, the story of the Milky Way, the path that connects this world and the spirit world. Through that project, that installation, many thousands of people took boat tours going around the island, and for the first time heard a little bit about the Lenape and Lenape history. And it's so important to work on public projects that can inform and educate. As Joe was mentioning, it sometimes takes seeing an object in a collection in a museum, having access to that, to create a renaissance, to inform new generations and inspire new generations. And that's what we are really lacking right now in New York City. It's been really too long since we've been able to offer visitors coming from all over the world, offer New Yorkers, offer school kids a place to see Lenape art, Lenape culture, and to be immersed in it. So an exhibition is long overdue. And I think Joe may want to add to that.
Well, it's been 28 years of silence. We've been waiting. We Lenape people have been waiting 28 years for that first Lenape exhibit to be expressed in the city of New York. The National Museum of the American Indian, which today rests upon the footprint of the fort, Dutch West India Company, New Amsterdam, has never delivered a Lenape exhibit. And think about what an incredible story that is to tell. So we're hopeful that there's a museum or an entity within the great city of New York who will be the very first to see the opportunity and help us realize an exhibit of Lenape art and culture.
You're alluding to some of maybe the future projects or the future direction of Lenape Center. In addition to a physical space that could be the hope for the future, what else might you see in some of the programming, some of the aspirations for where we should go from here?
We've begun to work with universities to provide scholarships. We want to see the Lenape diaspora be able to access New York City through education and have an ability to attend school, attend university through scholarships. That's really something that really needs to happen. And this is home to many thousands of people, original ancestral home. And yet we need to see more efforts coming from institutions. We like to see more coming from the city of New York to create opportunities for diaspora to return home through education, through employment, through internships. Now, we know this is a very challenging time in this time of COVID, but we also know this place, this land, this has been home for many thousands of years. And to be able to be part of the change in seeding this consciousness, then everyone will benefit.
So now we might have some time for questions and answers from our viewers. Adrian?
So one question came in, which is, will you please talk about how you see the applications of Lenape traditional ecological knowledge being applied in a dense urban space like New York City today? great question. Well, the New York Botanical Garden is that comes to mind. We should point out that they have been actively growing food for New York City, and that's something that we really want to be a part of, to be able to enable for Lenape traditional food, Lenape corn, Lenape beans, Lenape squash, to feed the city. We need more of these indigenous staple foods to be part of the everyday, to be part of the understanding of place.
We have to, nurture and care for our people and all people. And the garden is a significant vehicle for that very purpose. And also community gardens throughout the city, the 5 boroughs of New York, have all great potential for growing healthy traditional food for everyone. I mean, there should be no, we should not have hungry people in our world today. It's just not acceptable.
We're at a crossroads. We're at a point of, in terms of Mother Earth and the environment, that if we don't really focus and create a collective movement towards balancing ourselves, then we will see, through the changes coming, enormous and much more suffering. The water, the oceans are rising. New York City itself is threatened, and we could lose a large part of New York City. So in many ways, some of our ecological focus is understanding the responsibility and the care for place. And that's a responsibility that ancestrally has been part of the Lenape way of life since the beginning, the oneness with place. And without Lenape contribution, without the Lenape understanding of place, then the city will not have done all it can. It's a critical part of being able to find balance in the face of climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Several of the viewers are asking if you have educational information, tours for students. I'm not sure if you received that question, Adrian, so I wanted to make sure that it was asked.
We've given many presentations in schools at all grade levels, from second grade to graduate school to even law school, and we continue to do so. We're also happy to share Joe's going to be offering a course this coming spring at the Columbia School of Social Work. It'll be something that is just unlike anything else that's being offered currently in New York City. We're actively giving lectures, and so anyone who wants to inquire can simply email lenapecenter@gmail.com, and we'll be able to be a resource for education. We're happy to do that.
And some of the viewers were specifically asking about sites or about books or resources. And I know that that's a really difficult thing in terms of history and even present understandings of Lenape. So I'm hoping that maybe you could explain where to get more information aside from Lenape Center.
Delaware Tribe has really an amazing website, which has a lot of history, a lot of knowledge that people can access. The books, it's very tricky. We're often asked if we can recommend a book, and yet we really can't at this point. Maybe it's time that new books be written. As far as places, Inwood Hill Park is one of these places. And then in terms of contemporary expression, Tammany Hall, the Hudson River, the Mohikanituk.
Additional questions that our viewers have that you wanted to address, or any other thoughts?
Did we have any more questions coming in? Okay, I see. So there was a question about the forced migrations, and did people try to stay closer? You know, one of the things I wanted to mention is we often hear the story of colonization and the ensuing conflict as if it were about conflict over trade during the fur trade. Yet, when really one begins to understand the holistic destruction of Lenapehoking, it also includes the nature, the woodlands. Up to 95% of the original old growth forest was cut down. And along with the impact of diseases, the impact of colonization that included massacres, of land theft, of invasive plant species, of a collapse of a whole ecosystem, of a inability to continue. There was very little choice but for the people to move. Survivance means that sometimes one has to be on the move.
Mhm. And to think in terms of what courage and what strength was involved for a body, a community of people to stay together throughout this long movement into the western regions of North America, keeping intact the language, the traditions, and the culture. That's phenomenal. And I think it deserves great respect and recognition.
True survivance. And Lenape Center is an embodiment itself of that survivance. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Joe Baker, Adrian Kumans, Curtis Zunigha of Lenape Center, and Todd Poisson from BKSK. You can check out all of our First Peoples Week programming as well as our digital art platform at thegreenspace.org. Wanishi, thank you, and have a great evening.
Wanishi.
Wanishi.
Wanishi.